Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Stocks going into the green. The Nasdaq 100 hitting a record high. Democrats, meantime, proposing a sweeping police reform bill amid nationwide protests that are continuing across the country about racial inequality. This as big brands, large and small, including big tech, continue to respond in kind. Amazon flashing a Black Lives Matter banner across its main page. To the anger of some customers, CEO Jeff Bezos responding personally. Facebook also continuing to face the fallout from Mark Zuckerberg's decision to let a post suggesting looters be shot from President Trump stand. Meantime, New York starting to reopen today. This on the back of a largely positive jobs report that has been somewhat debated, and that's sending the markets to new highs. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, who's been covering all of the action. And Abigail, first of all, lots of debate about the jobs numbers, whether or not they were in fact correct. Investors looking optimistic either way.
They are looking optimistic either way, depending on either, irrespective of those job numbers. And if you believe them, and it seems as though most people are going with that, even though there is some question, and even Larry Kudlow had allowed for some possibility that there's a rounding situation there in terms of how BLS counted certain Americans and those jobs. We have tons of optimism and investors just going into risk assets. And at the end of the day, Emily, it is very positive in terms of the reopening, and that's certainly helping stir the animal spirits. But the real stirrer of the animal spirits remains the Fed and all of the liquidity that they've been pumping into the system. So on the day, we have all-time highs, record closing highs for both the NASDAQ Composite and the NASDAQ 100. Interesting, though, Emily, because at the end of the day, you had stocks that earlier were not participating, such as Apple and Microsoft. Those stocks were higher, but where we still had declines, small ones, but we still did have declines, both the SOX and also the Golden Dragon China Index, which is a composite of Chinese companies listed here in the U.S. Both of those down, suggesting that maybe U.S.-China tensions are somewhere on the horizon. You always want to look at divergences, so that does stand out. But again, on the day, mostly all in, risk on, record highs. The S&P 500's loss on the year erased. And again, the NASDAQ itself at a record closing high, even as the corporate profit outlook, has been largely taken lower. Investors simply looking past it to the end of this year and next year, Emily.
So talk to us about how big tech in particular was driving or not driving the rally today.
So there really wasn't a lot of participation by big tech. At the end of the day, there was a bit of a catch-up for big tech. At one point, the tech sector had been down sharply. Apple, Microsoft had been lower. One winner all day, Amazon, and I think that this has to do with, even though we're reopening, the idea that they're going to continue to benefit as so many Americans have started to use their services more. But Facebook, basically up just a little bit. Netflix down a little bit. Alphabet, we do have up about 0.6%, and Amazon, of course, receiving some price target boosts, but overall lagging on the day. So these are the stay-at-home stocks, those sectors, the new defense on the year. And because we're now reopening, that's where investors have been moving out of. But on the year, Emily, those FANG stocks, they've been the big leaders, up about 29% on the year, both the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 lagging. So even if you have investors not thinking so much about the reopening and that it's going to boost the other sectors, the cyclical sectors, you could simply just have catch up. That sector, the FANG stocks have gone so far so fast, cooling off now, and some of the other stocks catching up. Let's hope that it does not come at too big of an expense for some of those big momentum names, because there's only so much money out there. And in terms of rotations, if it really comes out of those mega cap names, it could be painful. But that didn't happen today at the end of the day. It was happening earlier, Emily, but at the end of the day, very much risk on.
All right, Abigail, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Thank you, as always, for joining us to weigh in. Well, Facebook still in the hot seat over Mark Zuckerberg's response to a controversial post by President Trump suggesting that looters be shot. Zuckerberg has said he will reconsider Facebook's policies, but this particular decision still stands. Content moderation has, of course, long been a contentious issue for Facebook, and others are now diving into the root of the perceived problems. Joining us now to discuss, Paul Barrett, Deputy Director of the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, just out with a new report on Facebook content moderation. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. So you draw a direct line between Facebook's content moderation issues and how and who they hire to carry out their content moderation policies. Tell me what you mean.
Well, Facebook, I think in a fashion that would seem unlikely to some people, outsources the vast majority of the human content moderation that it does, even though this function is a centrally important aspect of the social media business. And I think that as a result of its marginalizing content moderation, a lot of unfortunate consequences flow from that.
Talk to us about the unfortunate consequences. I mean, how can you draw a direct line between the outsourcing of contractors? And to be fair, this is a massive undertaking for Facebook with billions and billions of users, literally. You know, talk to us about how you see those consequences as a direct result of how and who they have in place doing this job.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that you can show a direct relationship in some sort of mathematical sense, but in the making content moderation a peripheral function rather than a central function, I think has contributed to the inadequacy of the content moderation that's done, for example, in the developing world, and has led to problems, including violence, in countries like Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and India. Closer to home, you have the problem of inadequate mental health care that's provided to content moderators. I think that's a function of their being in an outsourced environment rather than being full-time employees of Facebook, where they would have Silicon Valley style benefits packages and presumably compensation as well. So those would be two examples.
Meantime, the controversy over this particular post by the president continues to swirl. You have scientists over the weekend working for the Zuckerberg initiative protesting the decision. You've got Facebook employees, early Facebook employees, and our discussion here points to the very heart of the issue that Facebook does engage in content moderation already for its users. Why hold the president to a different and perhaps lower standard? What's your take on Zuckerberg's decision in this particular instance to let President Trump's post stand?
Well, I think you put it very acutely, and that is the company spends a lot of time outlining standards, they call them community standards, that they're supposed to enforce against all of their users. And then when one particular user comes along who happens to send his posts from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there seems to be a very different standard. And I think that many people view that as unfair and inappropriate, both outside the company and crucially inside the company as well.
Now, meantime, there's all of these cascading issues as, you know, in part potentially a result of Zuckerberg's decision here, but also the fact that these conversations about the social crisis we're in right now are happening on Facebook. You have Facebook groups splintering because of differing views, differing political views on the Black Lives Matter movement. A mom's group in New York City reportedly broke up because of discussion about racial issues. Talk to us about sort of the consequences of this that we may not even realize may be a result of this direct decision and the overall manner in which Facebook moderates its content.
Right. Well, the moderation of the groups, I think, is an illustration that's important to underscore, is an illustration of just how tremendous this challenge is for the company. While I'm critical of the company, at the same time, you want to be fair to them. And the idea of trying to find a way to superintend all of these many private groups that are underway and keep the peace among their participants is a tremendous challenge. And I'm not sure Facebook has figured out how to crack that nut or how to help people supervise the groups they start up. And this problem is only going to become exacerbated as Mark Zuckerberg pursues his goal of making Facebook more of a private exchange than a public town square style exchange. So I think there's more of this to come.
Meantime, Facebook is continuing to put out fires around the world. In the Philippines, they're investigating the proliferation of fake Facebook accounts using the identities of students, journalists, and lawmakers. Do you have any suggestions for how Facebook could be doing this better?
Well, I mean, one thing I think is that they need more people doing the work than they have presently. 15,000 people sounds like a lot, and it is. But as you pointed out earlier, when you have billions of users and volume that goes along with that, and you have misuse of the platform, as you're describing in the Philippines, and that kind of misuse takes place in other countries around the world, you just need more man and woman power. And I think that's something that Facebook has got to come to grips with.
So what would you like to see Facebook do next, quickly?
Well, quickly, I think they should bring the content moderators in-house. They should augment the forces in their content moderation workforce. They should appoint a content czar who would oversee all matters related to content moderation, fact-checking, and the like, and centralize that activity in a way that would make it more efficient.
All right. Paul Barrett of the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate hearing your views here on the show.
My pleasure.
All right, coming up, Airbnb seeing a surge in domestic travel despite global travel coming to a general standstill. We'll give you an update coming up. This is Bloomberg. We're getting some breaking news now out of North Korea. This confirming reports that circulated over the weekend that North Korea now says it is determined to shut down all contact with South Korea. This coming from the Korean news agency KCNA. North Korea to cut lines with the South completely at noon. So we even have a timestamp on it. The country saying they will cut off all communication lines with South Korea. Of course, this could be a potentially very dramatic development. We know that the relationship between North and South Korea has been souring in recent weeks. And of course, there's a very long history there. That's something that we, of course, will continue to follow. Meantime, to our next story, as I mentioned at the top, New York City starting its phased reopening today, back in business, but not completely. Earlier today, the chairman of the MTA and CEO Pat Foy joined Bloomberg to discuss how the opening will roll out and what it means for the city's transportation system. Take a listen.
Happily today, we're restoring full service on the subway. Service is good this morning. Last week, we did a physical survey of about nearly 50,000 customers, and mask compliance, which is now a part of state law, was 92%. The most important thing that the most important thing our customers can do is to wear masks to protect themselves and their co-commuters and our employees. And that 92% is an impressively high number and one we want to drive higher.
How are you going to police usage of masks? I'm on a train, I'm on a bus, and there's that one idiot, those two idiots without a mask. How do you police that?
So here's an answer to that question. First, we're starting from a good place, which is 92% compliance. I spent 40 minutes in Grand Central Terminal this morning, and frankly, the customer compliance looked higher than that. What the MTA is doing this morning in subway stations throughout the entire system is distributing this week 2 million masks. We got 1 million masks donated by the state and the city each. We've got MTA employees and volunteers from both the state and the city and the MTA helping distribute those masks. So the most important action that can be taken by our customers is wearing masks. 92% is a pretty good start. We're going to monitor it and report it going forward. On top of that, we are disinfecting every subway car, every bus, every Metro North and Long Island Railroad commuter rail at least once a day. And in the case of subways and buses and commuter rails, multiple times a day. We're disinfecting our stations, all of them, at least twice a day. We announced a couple of weeks ago the great news that ultraviolet C light, according to research by Dr. David Brenner at Columbia University, kills the COVID-19 virus. And we're piloting that right this week, last week, this week, and next week on subways and buses. We'll roll it out to Metro North and Long Island Railroad. Beyond that, we're also looking at antimicrobials, which promise to have the ability to eradicate the COVID-19 virus, but also to do that in months after application.
Mr. Foy, let me bring in my colleague, Lisa Abramowitz. Lisa?
Well, no, Chair, one thing that I'm struggling to understand is how quickly ridership has to get back up to near where it was in the past in order for the MTA to remain solvent without federal government help or additional borrowing, perhaps, through the Fed's new facility.
So, Lisa, great question. Obviously, in the CARES Act, the MTA received over $3.8 billion. The HEROES Act, which was passed by Speaker Pelosi, and both of those we owe great thanks, and I have to acknowledge the work that Senator Schumer and the New York congressional delegation did on a bipartisan basis. Like every transit agency in the country and around the world, ridership has declined precipitously. That's the flip side, obviously, of New Yorkers responding to Governor Cuomo's directive and request that people stay home. Today is an important day, phase one of the recovery of New York. We expect, and anecdotally, first of all, we're providing really solid, reliable subway and bus service this morning. There have been no delays reported. We see mass compliance at a very high level, and we believe that ridership is headed higher. Obviously, we are in the phase one significantly below the ridership in pre-pandemic days. We and every other transit agency are going to require federal aid to get us through 2020. About half of our revenue is based on fares and tolls. The other half is on a package of dedicated taxes and subsidies, which are economically sensitive or transaction based. The Fed's action last week on the municipal liquidity facility is important. Governor Cuomo has dedicated named the MTA as one of the revenue bond issuers in the state of New York that is eligible for MFL applications.
MTA Chair and CEO Pat Foy there as New York City subways and buses start filling up slowly once again. Coming up, curbing the power of Google search. U.S. regulators approach one of Google's competitors. We'll have the CEO of Duckduckgo with us next. U.S. federal and state regulators are working to require Google to give its users a choice about what search engine to use in a continued antitrust probe into the search giant. Regulators seeking the help of one of Google's competitors, and that is Duckduckgo. Joining us is the CEO and founder of Duckduckgo, Gabriel Weinberg. Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned, you've been a competitor to Google for many years and for a long time in trying to convince users with a sort of privacy-first stance why Duckduckgo is a better alternative. For those who don't know, what is your case to users about why they should use your search engine instead of Google's?
Sure. I mean, quite simply, people are tired of being tracked online. And at Duckduckgo, we really just believe people who want to be able to choose a private option online should be able to do so simply. And we enable that for everybody. So we have a private search engine alternative to Google, but we also have a mobile browser that blocks trackers across the internet. So if you're kind of annoyed about ads following you around, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg of harms, of privacy harms online, there's discrimination, propaganda, et cetera. We protect you from all of that.
Now, many people say they're happy with Google service. It is free. It is helpful. You've spoken with U.S. regulators. I know you can't share too much about those conversations, but how do you think the government can sell its case to the general public when it is, by many, a beloved service?
Yeah, I mean, so going back to privacy, we find most people now really would like to be able to choose a private option online. And we find about a third of Americans actually taking action to protect their privacy online. And unfortunately, it is really hard to use DuckDuckGo on Android, pretty much by design. So unlike on iOS, where there's a search engine setting, on Android, there's not. And so what a search preference menu does, one of the things we've been talking to the Department of Justice and other entities about, is it enables anyone who wants to be able to choose a private option online. And that's really what we're about, is an empowered consumer. So yes, a lot of people like and would like to use Google, but also a lot of people would like to use DuckDuckGo, and they just can't do it right now very easily.
So what could be a better remedy in your opinion? For example, if Google were forced to sell some of its advertising technology business, would that help resolve the competition issues? If not, what would?
So we've advocated for a few remedies. The one that we've advocated the most for, because it's quite simple, is this preference menu. When you install Chrome or get an Android device, it would allow you to choose what search option you like. And if you'd like a private option, it would make that really easy, which is not today. In addition, we actually created a model do not track law. So in a lot of browsers, there's a do not track setting where you can go into the privacy settings and turn on what it's called do not track. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to most users, it actually does nothing right now. There's no legal teeth behind it. And so we've been advocating to make that a reality, so that when it says do not track, it actually means do not track. And the third thing we've advocated for is that Google shouldn't be able to share data between its business units. So your search history, which we protect completely anonymously, but right now when you search on Google, they use that to follow ads at you across the internet. So you wouldn't be able to use that on YouTube or Gmail or the millions of sites they have ads on.
Okay. Now, what is your sense quickly of how fast the government wants to wrap this up? We are heading into a contentious election. Might it be wrapped up by then, or is this something that's going to take years?
We're really not sure on timeline, to be honest. If you look historically, cases have taken many years. But whenever you're thinking about a case, you're also thinking about a settlement. And so we think a preference menu type of remedy is attractive in that regard. Google's already proposed one in the EU, and there's a preference menu there that unfortunately suffers from a lot of problems, mainly because Google proposed it. But this gives the US a chance to leapfrog the EU and impose a remedy that actually works well.
All right, DuckDuckGo founder and CEO Gabriel Weinberg. Gabriel, we'll continue to follow this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, 10%. That is the number of all venture capital deals that go to women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders in Silicon Valley. We'll talk to an investor, Arlen Hamilton, who is trying to change that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. In the last few weeks, two high-profile venture firms, including Softbank and Andreessen Horowitz, have announced new initiatives to back founders of color. This amid loud calls to re-examine social and racial inequality in the United States. But one firm beat them to it, and that is Backstage Capital, which has invested $7 million and more into more than 130 startups led by underrepresented founders, including women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders. I caught up with founder and managing partner Arlen Hamilton for her thoughts on diversity and equality in Silicon Valley as protests over racial issues continue to rage across the country.
I think we've just been in a constant state of trauma. And definitely have been feeling it both as a human and then just watching this ecosystem feel it as well.
There have been a lot of companies, tech leaders making statements, making commitments, making donations. How do we hold them accountable?
I'm not sure we can, but I have just been speaking out as much as I can and just being honest. It's not so much of an attack on any one person or group. It's just an honest, we're all real here. We're all human here, right? And we're on this spinning rock at the same time. And when you have billions and billions of dollars under management and you make announcements about smaller either donations or initiatives or funds that are going to Black founders during this time when it's almost like you have to make those announcements, it does ring hollow in some cases. And I also try to really uplift the voices of the Black operators within those companies who are, I know how difficult it is to raise even $1 million, towards this as a Black person in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. So it is a balancing act. And I just think that the people who have the purse, who control the purse strings should hold themselves accountable and should be on the right side of history here instead of leaving it, their kind of closed door in the bunker, as it were.
Softbank is launching a $100 million fund backing companies led by people of color. This has been your strategy from the very beginning, to invest in women, people of color, LGBTQ founders. You tweeted, "I'd like to announce that I'm starting a $13 fund for straight white men. I'll be giving 26 straight white men 50 cents along with exposure, experience, and mentorship of my choosing." You're welcome. What's your point?
My point was, it wasn't directed at any one company or fund. It truly was and is directed at all funds led by white men that have lots of means and are doing a paltry amount into this initiative. With SoftBank in particular, again, Paul Rudd and Stacey Brown Philpott, I'm so grateful for the work that they're doing within that SoftBank $100 million funding. I hope that they have investment power and that they move the needle, because I know how difficult it is to do things within those organizations. SoftBank is a $100 billion fund and growing, and has put hundreds and hundreds of millions into things that have sunk. And so I think I've said this and I believe this, it is not enough for them or anyone else, but it is something, and something is better than nothing.
There's been a push for more diversity across the tech industry, across corporate America, but the numbers have changed barely. Do you think this is an opportunity, in a way, with so many people being laid off, so much talent now out there, for companies to take dramatic steps to change the ratio in kind of one fell swoop?
I think it is their opportunity, yes. I don't know if I believe they will take it or how many of them will take it, but that is their laid bare in front of them. I also believe that there will be so many people who take it upon themselves to start their own companies, to start their own mini empires, if you will, that won't be looking to those companies to hire them or to take them in. So you're going to be losing talent, you're going to be bleeding talent. If you don't look at this as an opportunity to be better and to do better, rather than simply an annoyance or an HR PR stunt.
So much of what is happening now is pouring out on social media, and it just brings the point home about how much technology has advanced, but how much the core issues, racism, racial injustice, have not changed. And I wonder if you think, because of the opportunities that technology has created, it could be a way to solve some of these issues, or if it can make them worse.
Oh, it has the potential to do both, to do either, to do a little bit of both, right? I just think that, as you said, there's the great opportunity not only for these corporations to maybe bring on new talent or change their ratio, which I'm not so much interested in. There's a great opportunity for those who didn't have the means before, but had the talent and the skill and the wherewithal to create these new technologies and to build upon old technologies towards more equity. To be given that power. What I mean by that is you have a lot of individuals now who are backing people up, so at the table. So there are a lot of allies who are saying, how do I get my money into an individual or into an organization that can do better? And I think that is really interesting. You know, Brad Feld reached out to me just a couple of days ago and said, tell me where you would like to see my money doing the best that it can. And that's a little different than saying, making an announcement of what they decided to do. It was, I'm going to speak to Black women and people of color, and I'm going to ask them where they want me to put my money. I think that's really bold and interesting.
Meantime, when it comes to social media, you had Twitter flagging a tweet, hiding a tweet from the president suggesting that looters be shot. Mark Zuckerberg taking the opposite stance, leaving that post up. He has spoken with civil rights leaders, and they've come away disappointed. What's your take on that decision?
I think Mark's decision was wrong. I have spoken to people at Facebook high up, for a great deal of time, and I've seen people try with them. There are some really amazing people at Facebook, and they're speaking out now, and even more so are not speaking out, but I think they will. You have one young white man who has one experience in this life, who has the control of billions of people, like what they see and what they view. It is wrong. And I don't know if he's drunk with power or if he's simply just in a bubble. But someone needs to step in. Someone needs to say something. He needs to be better, and he needs to do better. I know there are people around him. I actually am friends with people around him who love him, who love him and he loves them back. And I would hope that they would pick up the phone and make a phone call and say, this is not right. You can't be the only person making these types of decisions. You simply do not have the lived experience to make these types of decisions.
You once told me that you'd let the next Mark Zuckerberg, quote unquote, walk away if he happened to be a he, straight, white, and male. And I wonder, in the context of what's happening now, if that statement has new meaning.
Yes, and it has for a while. I remember that. It has for a while because I think, I laughed when you asked me about that, because I thought the standard of Mark Zuckerberg being this high standard to me is just not there. Not that I have a problem with him as a human, but the standard of this archetype of this young white man, college dropout, it just doesn't excite me. I'll take a Jessica Matthews and a Sheena Allen and a Don Dixon over a Mark Zuckerberg any day.
In October 2018, you appeared on the cover of Fast Company, joining Oprah, Beyonce, Serena Williams, Lena Waithe as the only Black women to grace that cover. It was a huge moment for you, and people wanted to hear more of what you had to say. So now you're out with a book called It's About You Know What Time, How to Turn Being Underestimated into Your Greatest Advantage. What's your goal here?
The book is I hope to inspire, I hope to inform, and I hope to embolden people who feel underestimated, as I have and still do, because there is a lot that we can do. We do not have to wait for some sort of hero to come to save us. And more than anything, I want people to walk away from it, allies and others, to walk away from this understanding that Black people, all people of color, women, LGBTQ, etc., this is as much ours as it's anyone else's. This existence, a piece of this existence is as much ours. And that's what equity is. And that's what equality is. And I hope that the book continues to do what it has done so far since the release, which is it really inspire, but not only inspire, give people the tools and the understanding that they too can do something as bold as what I've attempted.
Backstage Capital has now invested $5 million, I believe, in 100 different startups, companies led by underrepresented founders. And I should disclaim that Bloomberg Beta, the venture capital arm of Bloomberg LP, is one of your investors. What's the latest on the fund, the progress you've made, the challenges you've run into?
Oh, the challenges are abundant. We've invested about $7 million into 130 companies at this point. There are smaller investments. The challenges have been in raising more. We have follow-on funding, follow-on opportunities that are just left on the table. We have new opportunities that are left on the table. We have the most diverse portfolio in venture, I would say, and it's being left opportunity. But a lot of our companies are thriving, and even in the age of COVID are thriving. You think about companies that have been close to the bone anyway when it comes to capital and resources. Something like COVID comes along, there's not very far for them to be knocked down. So they were resourceful and already generating revenue themselves, and this is something that is just in their DNA. Certainly there are challenges. It's always about lack of resources. I feel like I'm moving like a whatever ton boulder on my back, and I'm just walking one step at a time, and I'm looking for someone to give me, a little bit of a lever to kind of help me a little bit, or put me on a skateboard or something. But I couldn't be more excited and proud of this portfolio.
What do you think the impact of this crisis will be on the tech economy? What does Silicon Valley look like after this?
I really think, and I don't know, it will be seen what the intention and the why of this is, but I really do think you're going to finally see more funding going to underrepresented founders. And again,
That's
it may be, it's optimistic. Oh, it also, it may be yanked and
the most
pulled.
optimistic thing I've heard you say.
Yeah, well, I believe it, and I think it's because some people are going to be guilted, some people are going to be forced by that, but a lot of people are just going to turn into allies and see for the first time, take that sort of rose-colored glasses off for themselves and say, oh, there are people that are living a different experience than I am, and my having privilege does not mean I'm any less smart or any less skilled. It just means that it was a different path for me to get to where I'm getting. There are more thorns in the bushes for these others who are walking in the same path, And I think that's finally going to be seen and understood, and that's going to lead to a market change. Now, we'll see how long it takes and who is the front runner, but we'll get there.
Arlen Hamilton there, founder of Backstage Capital. Turning now to Airbnb, the short-term rental service is seeing a bit of a recovery as lockdowns ease across the country. The rental business had basically shut down in March and for most of April with people confined to their home. But now Airbnb is seeing a rise in demand for vacation rentals close to home. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Olivia Carville, who's been covering this story. So, Olivia, what is Airbnb saying about what is happening with their business right now?
Well, I spoke to Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky over the weekend, and he said that they have noted a number of trends through May. One is that more people are traveling, more people are booking Airbnbs, and they're doing this, as you said, closer to home. They're doing it within about 200 miles driving distance of where they live. They're going to local beach houses or mountains or lakes to try and just get out of the apartment or house that they've been locked up in for the last couple of months. So they're moving from bigger cities to smaller towns. They're also staying for longer. So I think that people taking advantage of the work from home policies and maybe heading out of town for a couple of weeks to work from a vacation rental rather than staying in town and working from their apartment. And they're also more impulsive when they're making these bookings. So when some people may have booked a couple of months in advance for their week-long vacation in summer, now they're booking days in advance because there's so much uncertainty. They want to be sure that they can actually get on the road and get to that home at the time that they intend to travel. So a lot of different moving parts with these early stages of the recovery.
Absolutely. I can say from personal experience, I know that the restrictions in California, many parts of California, are still in place on Airbnb. I know friends who just had an Airbnb booked for next week that canceled on them. So, talk to us about how Airbnb is going to continue to navigate these issues with continued uncertainty ahead.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just Airbnb, it's other vacation rental companies like Vrbo as well that are seeing this surge in demand, but trying to kind of keep up with it and understand whether it means a sustainable long-term trend or if this is just pent-up demand. I talked to the head of Vrbo, Jeff Hurst, and he was saying that as soon as a location reopens, there's just this pop in demand. So people are waiting for states like Florida, Colorado, and Maine that have been reopening very recently. And as soon as they do, people are just booking straight away. So it's kind of this patchwork quilt of different regulations across the country, and slowly places are starting to allow people to move around and to travel. And it's those states and those cities that are reopening that these vacation rental companies are seeing this comeback. And they were some of the first companies to be hit. Travel was one of the hardest hit sectors in the pandemic, and now we're seeing the first signs of recovery from those travel companies as well. So it's an interesting time for them.
So what's the view on how this is going to affect Airbnb's business longer term? I mean, they've already laid off a very large percentage of the company. Travel, may not come back to normal levels for years? We don't know. I mean, what's their outlook?
Yeah, they laid off about 25% of their workforce, so that's around 1,900 people. And their valuation has also been hugely impacted by coronavirus. Long term, I don't think anyone knows. I mean, when I was talking to Chesky, he was saying the big question for him is whether the current surge in demand is just pent-up demand or if it is reflective of a more sustainable trend that people are going to want to travel domestically for the next couple of years. And that's a question that he's kind of weighing at the moment. And even more important for Airbnb right now is that they had intended to go public in 2020. And that left a big question mark over whether or not they were able to do that when the pandemic hit. Chesky had initially planned to file the S1 on March 31st and obviously wasn't able to do that given the market turmoil. And now the question remains as to whether Airbnb is going to go public this year. He said that he's still considering it. It's still an option. He hasn't ruled it out yet, and he's just watching the markets to see what happens and watching the rebound and trying to work out if this is more long-term or if this is just some short-term relief.
All right. Olivia Carville, who covers Airbnb for us. Olivia, I know you'll continue to follow this story. Thanks so much for that update. Meantime, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos gets criticism from plenty of customers all the time. Now he's actually writing back to customers he says he's happy to lose. That story is next. This is Bloomberg. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos is sharing what he calls sickening emails in response to Amazon placing a Black Lives Matter across its main website. Joining us now to discuss, Bloomberg's Matt Day, who covers Amazon. And I just want to lay out, Matt, what's happened here for our viewers. Last week, Bezos posted an email from a customer saying, "I canceled my order and I know for a fact I won't be the only one. Maintain your stance and we will watch your profits decline and laugh about it." In response, Bezos said, "I have a 20-year-old son and I simply don't worry that he might be choked to death while being detained one day. It's not something I worry about. Black parents can't say the same." He, following up to that, received a deluge of inbound from other customers who were unhappy. Bezos saying, "There have been a number of sickening but not surprising responses in my inbox since my last post. This sort of hate shouldn't be allowed to hide in the shadows. It's important to make it visible. This is just one example of the problem." And Dave, you're the kind of customer I'm happy to lose. Matt, walk us through this. It's unusual to hear Jeff Bezos being so vocal and so personal.
No, it really is. He was a real latecomer to social media, and he doesn't use it, very much compared to other tech CEOs. He's also been kind of quiet over the years on social issues. Right? I mean, he's not been out front on very many things at all. And when it comes to political things of any stripe, he doesn't typically comment. So it's rare to get any view at all into the guy's inbox, and certainly for him to do twice over the span of a weekend, give us a glimpse into something that he's thinking and something that's going to burning down the house metaphorically around here.
Now, talk to us about Amazon's own history with diversity, because we want actions to meet words, right? I mean, how successful has Amazon itself actually been in diversifying its own workforce?
So Amazon's kind of in the same boat that a lot of big tech is. Very few women and people of color in their upper ranks. Their managers are nearly 3/4 men. It tends to be very white male rooms. Amazon is a little bit different from your garden variety. They have hundreds of thousands of warehouse workers, but those teams are far more diverse than their groups in headquarters. So, Amazon is really in the same boat as a lot of tech companies, that they've started to sort of say the right things about their priorities on this and making their workforce more representative of society as a whole, but there's still a long, long way to go.
Now, Amazon has, over the last few months, as you have valiantly been covering, faced a storm of controversy over how it's treated workers at its warehouses and how it has handled the COVID-19 crisis in general. What's your take on Bezos getting out front now when we didn't see a lot of him in the midst of that controversy?
I think it's definitely a sign of how seriously he's taking this. And I think one of the way that some observers and some insiders inside the company put it is that this has really become Jeff Bezos' platform kind of an employee recruitment and retention issue, right? You want to go to work at a place you can feel proud of, and you want to see your management out in front of issues that are important. So I think this really underlines at least Bezos' team's assessment of how important this is going to be. It's not something that's going to go away, and he wanted to sort of put a stamp on it in a way that he really rarely does.
Meantime, I'd like to compare what Bezos is doing here to Mark Zuckerberg and the much debated decision now to leave up President Trump's post suggesting that looters be shot. It has been suggested that perhaps Zuckerberg is trying to avoid more scrutiny from the president, from federal regulators, given potential antitrust issues that could affect Facebook. Amazon is not immune to that. Amazon is also a large company that's facing more scrutiny from the federal government. Sort of talk to us about Jeff Bezos' different tact here in standing up on what, unfortunately, some feel is a partisan issue.
Well, I think Bezos has proved just in the last year that he's willing to do that a bit with sort of his personal Instagram branding, as weird of a phrase as that is to say. Earlier, he had a public spat with a Trump trade advisor, conducted almost entirely on Bezos' part via Instagram. So it's certainly a place that he has decided to take risks as it pertains to the antitrust scrutiny or the risk of making enemies of the wrong officials in Washington. There are certainly just a couple of issues that he thinks are worth fighting about and potentially worth that downside of extra scrutiny from D.C.
Meantime, give us an update on the situation in warehouses as cities are reopening. What is the latest for these workers on the front lines in terms of the health and safety issues?
So we got a look into a warehouse, toured one just up here in Seattle just a couple of weeks ago, and it seems to have hit a kind of calmer point than it was in the early days of the pandemic when Amazon was making changes, sometimes day after day to enhance safety inside. Some workers who were previously sheltering at home have come back. A lot of folks still can't do that. They have to care for children. And one of the biggest issues right now is Amazon trying to sort of dig out of that deluge of requests from their own workforce for people who need special accommodations to manage kind of ongoing absences in the states that have yet to open up. But it seems like things are a little less crazy than they were maybe back in March and April.
All right, Matt Day, who covers Amazon for us out in Seattle. Matt, thank you so much for that update. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is next. Stay tuned. This is Bloomberg.